Nintendo is being extremely cryptic about something right now, and knowing them, it could either end up being something incredibly cool or just very plain and normal. If you haven't heard about this yet, basically last night Nintendo announced that they are doing a special playtest for Nintendo Switch Online members. They weren't very specific at all about what exactly is being tested. Basically, the only thing they really talked about was, hey, you need to have Nintendo Switch Online, and it's recommended that you have good internet, use your system docked, and have it plugged in for the best connection possible. And this morning, they opened up the application process to be able to be part of this playtest. Now, it was a first come, first served type scenario, and it was gone fast, like less than a second fast. Myself and a whole bunch of other people were ready to go right when this service went live. And basically in that instantaneous moment, some people got selected and in, and others, myself included, did not. Now, what's interesting about this is that even though they've now done the application process, they are still being extremely vague about what exactly they are playtesting. The only thing we really have learned is that for those people that have gotten in, we're told they will find out more on the 20th of this month, as well as having the additional requirement of needing to have so much space available on their Switch, which doesn't exactly tell us a whole lot more. Now, because Nintendo is being so vague about everything, on top of the fact that we haven't really seen them do a playtest like this before for Nintendo Switch Online, obviously there are all kinds of theories and ideas flying around of what exactly this could be. And there's one particular one I want to talk about because, first off, I just kind of hope it's true. I think it's something that does make a certain degree of sense. I think there'd be some excitement behind it if it is the case, but also kind of a bit of a sock in the gut at the same time. And that's the idea of them finally adding GameCube games to Nintendo Switch Online. With the important drawback that, unlike other Nintendo Switch Online games where they just launch from their own native app and are being played on the system, they would instead be stream played. Now, there's a couple different reasons why this idea could make sense to me. I think one of the biggest ones, honestly, is just looking at the timeline of Nintendo adding new stuff to Nintendo Switch Online. Obviously, history does not necessarily dictate exactly what they're going to be doing in the future, but the timeline does add up to a certain extent. Nintendo Switch Online launched back in September of 2018, and at that time, it was just NES games. A year later, also in September of 2019, we got SNES games added. October of 2021, we got the expansion pack launching, which added N64 and Genesis games. And then roughly a year and a half later, in February of 2023, we got Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games added. Now, the time between these launches isn't perfectly consistent. You had a year gap between NES and SNES, a whole 2 years between SNES and N64, a year and a half going into the Game Boy games. And while Nintendo is working their way through these additional systems, if there were plans to get into more consoles, the next step would be GameCube, or potentially, a slightly weirder but also a thing I would very much love, adding DS games. Now again, the headache with this is that based on the fact that they're testing how well people are able to stream play games using Nintendo Switch Online, the idea would be that, well, GameCube games or something would have to be streamed on the system. And this actually also makes sense because when you look into a lot of the arguments for why we haven't seen GameCube happen on the Switch just yet, a lot of it boils down to things like, actually running an emulator on the system is going to be too demanding to actually get solid performance out of running games on the Switch that way. GameCube games are also a lot larger in size than games that came out on previous systems, so having an all-in-one app where all those games are hosted on your system is going to be considerably larger in size than, say, the NES or SNES versions. And so there are some functional benefits to those games being hosted on a server that you're stream playing rather than having them be natively on the system, even though obviously, at least as far as the concept of having them on your system goes, yeah, a lot of people would certainly prefer that. Now, if this does end up being true, and this is what is being added to Nintendo Switch Online, there is one silver lining I'm kind of reaching and hoping out for, which is the timing of this announcement. It's honestly a little strange to be seeing a brand new feature and function being teased for Nintendo Switch Online right now because the Switch is hitting the age that it's hitting, and it makes a lot of sense that they would be testing and doing this right now because it is also lining up with their next system coming out. Now, one way you could look at this logic is that it is a feature that is going to be available to both of these systems, where there is some kind of new functionality that the next Switch is going to take advantage of, and there's going to be some degree of it existing on the current Switch as is. But the other way that I'm at least choosing to look at it right now is that if the feature being tested is being able to stream play GameCube games, it's because those games are going to be made available and running natively on the next system, but they don't want to limit that to being a next system only feature, and thus the stream play aspect is how you keep that availability alive for people on the current Switch. Now, I feel like this is the moment where it's very important to again emphasize this is all speculation based on an extremely vague playtest that Nintendo has announced and is being very coy about right now. But again, I think there is some logic to the timeline of GameCube games being added to the system. That is obviously something that has been very in demand. And while I understand the concept of it being limited to stream play for the current Switch because of power concerns, while obviously we don't have any hard details about the Switch successor, it would stand to reason that it is going to be a more powerful system than the current Switch and would be capable of doing some things that it can't do, like emulating this particular era of games. Now, the real reaching version of this for me is that they're also going to end up doing DS games, and that's a whole thing I've been dreaming about for the next system, where they find some way of doing dual screen functionality similar to the Wii U and give you a great way of playing awesome DS games on a modern system. Or maybe you just take the Switch tablet and turn it sideways vertically and use it that way. I don't know. I would love DS to happen, but GameCube certainly is the thing that makes more sense. Now, there is one important point I think to bring up in terms of skepticism about Nintendo doing GameCube games on Nintendo Switch Online, which is the idea of, do they really need to? Because while certainly the GameCube is old enough that those are retro titles and could be part of a collection like we've seen with NES, SNES, N64, and so on, it's also just fresh enough and just visually relevant enough that if they wanted to, Nintendo could really just focus on individually remastering or remaking all those games and re-releasing them on the Switch as individual full-price titles. And in fact, that's already a thing we've been seeing happening in real time and have quite a few games from the GameCube already on the Switch. We got a remaster of Metroid Prime, we got a remake of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, we had a remaster of Pikmin. While it hasn't happened yet, there were remasters of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess that were on the Wii U that people are hoping will make their way to the Switch and might as part of the next system, who knows, we'll see. But the point is that the GameCube library has already been lightly scraped, at least in terms of having some big name titles from it brought and made relevant on modern systems. That raises the question of how much stuff is really left to warrant having part of a large collection. Obviously, there are a lot more than just 5 games from GameCube, even if they are necessarily some of the biggest names from it. But what's to stop Nintendo from keeping that momentum going and just keep focusing on individual re-releases, especially if they just end up charging the full price for them? Which I think one counterexample that's interesting to bring up is Mario games, because Nintendo did their celebration where they released that collection of 3D Mario titles that included Sunshine, Galaxy, and Mario 64, and for whatever reason that was a limited time thing, they didn't keep it around, but then Mario 64 was made available as part of the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. So there is that precedence for games getting remastered, remade, and made available on their own individually, but still having a form being released that is a part of a subscription. It's a very specific example and a one-off for now, but I think it is worth pointing out that they have done that before. And the thing is, with how many wonderful GameCube games have already been remastered and brought on to current systems, there are a whole lot more that are still missing that I would love to see made available conveniently on a modern platform. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, Mario Kart Double Dash, Eternal Darkness, so many wonderful games that right now, if you want to be able to play them, at least through a legitimate means, you'd have to track down a physical copy, which, I don't know if you pay attention to those anymore, but they're very expensive, especially for the GameCube. So that's just some thoughts about one of the potential things Nintendo could be teasing as part of this playtest. Again, heavy grain of salt with all of this, because it's just as possible that this could end up being something maybe still cool, but not this, or something that's just not even actually cool, but a functional good thing for them to test and add as a feature anyways. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Are you hoping to see GameCube games added to Nintendo Switch Online? Would it be a deal breaker for you if those games are only available to stream play on the current Switch, or even on both systems, the upcoming and the current one? If it does come out, what games would you want to see made available as part of it that we just can't play any other way right now? Let me know down below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you all later.